My name is David, and this is the story of the night I spent at the old, abandoned railway station. I was never one to believe in ghosts or the supernatural, but what I experienced that night changed everything. I had missed the last train home. It was a cold, rainy night, and the next train wouldn't arrive until morning. With nowhere else to go, I decided to take shelter in the old, disused station at the edge of town. The place had been closed for decades, rumored to be haunted, but I dismissed those stories as local folklore. The station was eerily quiet as I stepped inside. The air was thick with dust, and the dim light from my phone cast long, sinister shadows on the walls. I found a bench and sat down, pulling my coat tighter around me. The sound of the rain tapping against the broken windows was almost hypnotic, lulling me into a drowsy state. Suddenly, I heard a faint whisper. At first, I thought it was just the wind, but then I heard it again, clearer this time. It was a voice, soft and urgent, calling my name. David, I stood up, my heart pounding. The voice seemed to be coming from the other end of the station. I hesitated, then slowly made my way toward the sound. The old wooden floorboards creaked under my weight, echoing through the empty space. David, over here, the voice was closer now, coming from one of the old ticket booths. I shone my phone's light into the darkness and saw a figure standing there. It was a man, dressed in an old-fashioned conductor's uniform, his face pale and gaunt. His eyes were hollow, and he stared at me with an intensity that made my blood run cold. Who are you?" I stammered. The man didn't answer. Instead, he raised his hand and pointed toward the tracks. I followed his gaze and saw, to my horror, a train approaching, but this was no ordinary train. It was old, its blackened exterior covered in rust and grime, and it moved without a sound. The train came to a stop in front of me, and the doors creaked open. Inside, I could see shadowy figures, their eyes glowing faintly in the darkness. They were beckoning me to come aboard. "David, come with us," the conductor said, his voice a haunting echo. I took a step back, my mind screaming at me to run, but my body felt frozen in place. The figures in the train reached out, their hands stretching toward me. I could feel a cold, unnatural pull, as if they were trying to drag me into their world. In a desperate burst of adrenaline, I turned and ran, sprinting out of the station and into the rain-soaked night. I didn't stop until I reached the safety of the town, my heart pounding and my mind racing. To this day, I can't explain what I saw that night. The old railway station has since been torn down, replaced by a modern building. But sometimes, late at night, I still hear that whisper in the wind calling my name, and I wonder if the ghostly train is still out there, waiting for its next passenger.
My name is Sarah, and this is the story of the night I encountered the cursed banyan tree. I had always been fascinated by local legends and ghost stories, but I never truly believed in them until that night. It was a warm summer evening, and my friends and I were camping near the outskirts of our town. We had heard tales about the old banyan tree that stood alone in the middle of a clearing, rumored to be haunted by the spirits of those who had died there. Curious and eager for a thrill, we decided to visit the tree after dark. As we approached the clearing, the air grew colder, and an unsettling silence fell over us. The massive banyan tree loomed ahead, its twisted branches stretching out like skeletal fingers. The moonlight cast eerie shadows on the ground, making the tree appear even more sinister. We gathered around the base of the tree, and I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. My friends, however, were more excited than frightened. They dared each other to touch the tree, laughing nervously as they took turns. "Come on, Sarah, it's your turn," one of them called out. I hesitated, feeling a strange sense of dread. But not wanting to be seen as a coward, I stepped forward and placed my hand on the rough bark. The moment I did, a chilling sensation shot through me, and I pulled my hand back in shock. Suddenly, the wind picked up, rustling the leaves and causing the tree to creak and groan. We all stood frozen, eyes wide with fear. Then, to our horror, we saw something move within the branches. A figure, barely visible in the dim light, was watching us. "Who's there?" I called out, my voice trembling. There was no response, only a low, menacing growl that seemed to come from the very heart of the tree. The figure began to descend, its movements slow and deliberate. As it emerged from the shadows, we saw that it was a woman, her hair long and tangled, her eyes dark and hollow. She wore a tattered white dress, stained with dirt and blood. "Leave this place," she whispered, her voice a haunting echo. "Or you will suffer the same fate." Panic set in, and we turned to run, but the roots of the banyan tree seemed to come alive, snaking around our ankles and holding us in place. The woman moved closer, her eyes fixed on me. "You have awakened the spirits," she said, her voice filled with sorrow and anger. "Now you must pay the price." Desperation gave me strength, and I struggled against the roots, finally breaking free. I grabbed my friends, urging them to run. We sprinted back to our campsite, not daring to look back until we were safely away from the tree. That night, none of us slept. We sat huddled around the campfire, too frightened to speak. The next morning, we packed up and left, vowing never to return to that cursed place. Since that night, I've had recurring nightmares of the banyan tree and the ghostly woman. I can still feel her cold gaze and hear her haunting voice. The legends were true, and I will never forget the terror of that night.
My name is Alex, and this is the story of the night I encountered the witch who lives deep within Blackwood Forest. I was always skeptical of the supernatural, but what happened that night shattered my disbelief forever. I had always loved hiking, and Blackwood Forest was my favorite spot. Despite the rumors of a witch living in the heart of the forest, I had never encountered anything unusual during my many visits. One evening, feeling particularly adventurous, I decided to hike deeper into the forest than I had ever gone before. As the sun began to set, the dense canopy of trees cast long, dark shadows across the forest floor. I pressed on, determined to reach the old cabin that supposedly belonged to the witch. The air grew colder, and an eerie silence enveloped me, broken only by the occasional rustling of leaves and distant animal calls. After what felt like hours, I finally saw it, a dilapidated cabin, barely visible through the thick foliage. It looked ancient, its wooden walls covered in moss and ivy. A chill ran down my spine as I approached, but curiosity overpowered my fear. I cautiously pushed open the creaky door and stepped inside. The interior was dark and musty, filled with strange artifacts and dusty shelves lined with jars of peculiar substances. In the center of the room stood a large cauldron, its contents bubbling with an ominous green glow. "Who dares enter my home?" a voice hissed from the shadows. I froze, my heart pounding. From the corner of the room emerged an old woman, her appearance as terrifying as the legends described. Her hair was wild and gray, her skin wrinkled and pale, and her eyes glowed with an unnatural light. I am sorry," I stammered. "I didn't mean to intrude. I was just curious." The witch cackled, a sound that sent shivers down my spine. "Curiosity can be dangerous, young one. Many have come seeking me, but few have left unscathed." I backed away, but the door slammed shut behind me. The witch raised her hand, and the air around me grew thick and heavy, making it difficult to breathe. "You seek to understand the power of the forest," she said, her voice a menacing whisper. "But the forest has a will of its own, and it demands a price for its secrets." As she spoke, the cabin seemed to come alive. The shadows twisted and writhed, and the walls creaked as if they were closing in on me. I felt an invisible force pulling me toward the cauldron, and I struggled in vain to resist. The witch began to chant in a language I couldn't understand, her voice growing louder and more insistent. The cauldron's glow intensified, casting eerie green light around the room. I felt myself being drawn closer to its bubbling contents, my strength waning. In a desperate attempt to escape, I reached for one of the jars on the shelf and hurled it at the witch. The jar shattered, and its contents erupted in a cloud of smoke. The witch screamed, momentarily distracted, and the force pulling me toward the cauldron weakened. Seizing the opportunity, I dashed for the door, flinging it open and stumbling into the night. I ran through the forest, branches tearing at my clothes and skin, not daring to look back until I reached the safety of the trailhead. I never returned to Blackwood Forest after that night. The memory of the witch's glowing eyes and the sound of her cackling haunt my dreams. The forest may hold many secrets, but some are best left undiscovered.